My name is Gene Paul White. I'm a retired Lieutenant Colonel of Marines, and I'm 86 and a half years old.
How did you come about joining the military? Can you tell me about like what branch you were in, the unit?
Well, I joined the Marine Corps in 1945. World War II was going on, and every able-bodied man was expected to go defend our country. When I turned 17, I was eligible to join the service, and I turned 17 in July of 1944, and I wanted to enlist right then. But my parents said, since we have to give our permission for you being under 18, we're not going to give you permission to enlist until you graduate from high school. So in June of 1945, I graduated from high school on the 2nd of June, and on the 3rd day of June, I was at the recruiting station swearing allegiance to the United States and to the United States Marine Corps. I chose the Marine Corps because they were fighting our battles in the Pacific area, and I wanted to go join them and participate in the liberation of Asia from the Japanese conquerors. And so I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I went to boot camp in San Diego, and while I was in boot camp, Japanese heard I was coming and surrendered. So I claim that I won World War II. I have a World War II victory medal to verify that. Of course, there's a whole lot of other guys that got the World War II victory medal too, so they had a part. But that's how I became a Marine in 1945, and over the years, passing years, I continued to be a Marine, and I think it was about 1948 I was promoted to the rank of sergeant, and that's the rank I held when June 25th, 1950 came around and the invasion of South Korea by the North Koreans began. I recall very well when it happened. I was on liberty in Long Beach with a couple of other friends from Camp Pendleton, and we saw a newspaper headline when they had newspaper stands. They don't now, that's kind of an outdated thing, but talked about the North Koreans invading South Korea. We didn't know where Korea was, we've never heard of Korea, but we figured that probably we're going to go there. That's what Marines do and what they did in those days. So we got back to camp and got prepared to go to Korea. It took a while because in 1950, 5 years after the end of World War II, the Marine Corps had been downsized from about 600,000 Marines with 6 divisions and 4 air wings to about less than 75,000 Marines. And that was, hardly a fighting force. They had 2 divisions, one at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and one at Camp Pendleton, California, and that's where I was. Well, our president decided that we were going to help, and he went to the United Nations and offered the services of the United States, which meant Marine Corps and Army and Navy and all branches. But Marine Corps being the smallest and having 2 understrength divisions, we had to gear up and get more people together to go fight the war in Asia. At that time, we were on peacetime table of organization. We only had units of 2 compared to units of 3 at every organization. A squad was 2 fire teams instead of 3. A platoon was 2 squads instead of 3 squads. A rifle company was 2 rifle platoons instead of 3 rifle platoons, and on up to battalion and division. So we were pretty short-handed. They were able to get enough people to form a brigade of 1 regiment and supporting arms to go to Korea early, and in August they landed at Busan and helped stem the tide of the North Korean who had overrun most of the Korean Peninsula. There was a small perimeter left, and upon the arrival of the 5th Marines, they were able to stop the gaps that the Army had not been able to hold, and stop the advance of the North Koreans, which saved the peninsula itself. In the meantime, planning went on, and we were growing bigger and bigger, getting people from other organizations and from the reservians being called to active duty. And by late August, we had formed another regiment, the 7th Regiment of the 1st Marine Division. Well, we formed part of it. The bulk of the regiment came from Camp Lejeune. The 3rd Battalion of the 7th Regiment was on board ship with 2 rifle companies, and we formed another rifle company at Camp Pendleton. The 6th Marine Regiment in Camp Lejeune was redesignated as 7th Marines and moved to Camp Pendleton. And they added a battalion there, and our battalion was going to join us and make it a full-strength battalion. And we went aboard ship, and in the meantime, the whole division came together at Incheon, and on the 15th of August, landed at Incheon and began the advance towards Seoul and the liberation of the South Korean area. In the meantime, Army was pushing up from south, and the forces joined, and we were able to push the North Koreans back. The 7th Marines, which I was in, we landed at Incheon, and we fought our way inland to the north of Seoul, and began our part in the Korean War.
What was the living condition like?
We were out in the field all the time. You know, we didn't have barracks because we couldn't. We were in a tactical situation. We advanced during the day against any enemy opposition, and we dig in for the night to protect ourselves, dig into foxholes and set up defensive positions in case of any enemy attack at night. We ate sea rations, which we carried with us, and we carried everything we had. We carried on our backs in a small pack. You know, we had our 1 day's rations all the time. We had ammunition, and we had a small amount of gear, maybe a pair of socks, extra pair of socks, and that's about it.
Was it difficult? Was there a lot of downtime?
Difficult? Well, we'd been training. In peacetime, we trained like we were in war. So that's how we lived. It was not unusual for us situation because we expected it, and consequently we were prepared for it. I think that some of the Army units had been in garrison in Japan and hadn't been doing training. They were more or less ceremonial units, and they weren't really ready to fight as well as the Marine Corps was. And we had smaller units, but we were more adept at fighting because we trained for it. That's what our mission was, and that's what we always expected to do in case of war. And the war came, and we went to war. So nothing changed, it's just the location. And then we were using live ammunition instead of blanks.
What was your impression of Korea when you arrived, and then the people there?
Well, we didn't get too close to the people because they got out of the way when the shooting started. You know, the few we saw were poor farmers until we went into Seoul, and we saw poor Korean people who lived in the community in the big city of Seoul. Like I say, we didn't have too much contact with them because when there was fighting going on, they got away from the area where the fighting was going on to save themselves from being killed or wounded. But we saw the rice paddies, we saw the homes that were built the old style with their heating units underneath the house, and I thought that was a pretty smart idea. Although now they've they've gotten a little more modern, but for the times it was pretty good system for heating your homes. And I thought the ones I saw were pretty smart people.
Did you have any interactions with the South Korean army?
No, we were, well, as being in a rifle company, we were more or less separated from the other branches of service. There are other Marines around us in close by areas, but we were not close connected to anybody but other Marines.
How about any interactions with foreign troops, allies?
Not initially. After we had succeeded in liberating Seoul from the North Koreans and advancing north to the northeast towards the 38th parallel, which had been the dividing line between the two countries, we had no direct connection with other branches of service or other foreign countries. On the 2nd of October, we were moving towards Uijeongbu, and I got wounded at that time, and I did get evacuated from there at the time. So, briefly for that period of time, I was out of the action because I was evacuated back to Japan to the Naval Hospital in Yokosuka, and I went there and recovered from my wounds, and eventually came back to join my regular organization. In North Korea, they had, after capturing Uijeongbu and getting back to the 38th parallel, the 1st Marine Division was pulled out, went aboard ship, and sailed around from the west side of the peninsula, around the base of the peninsula, up to the east side, up to Hungnam, or Hamhung, I don't remember, and went ashore there to begin fighting the North Koreans in North Korea with the idea that they were going to push back in North Korea and try to unite the whole country under the South Koreans. By that time, the North Korean army was pretty well beat up, and we advanced, and I returned to my organization from Japan, and rejoined my unit there in North Korea. And as we advanced to the north, up towards, going north towards the Yalu River, which was the dividing line between Manchuria and North Korea, Mao Zedong, the Chinese premier, was concerned that we might try to invade his territory, and so he got a bunch of volunteers well, he called them volunteers. In the Chinese army, I don't think anybody's a volunteer. He rounded up Chinese soldiers and sent them across the border in secrecy. We didn't know they were coming in until about the 25th of November. We had advanced up through towards the what we called the Chosin Reservoir, because we called it that because that's a name that we had on the only maps we had were Japanese maps, and that's what the name was on there. I later learned that it was called Changjin Lake by the Korean people. Anyhow, we advanced up there towards that location, and as we reached there, we were joined by Marines from Great Britain, specifically the 4-1 Commando of the British Royal Marines, who were tremendous fighters.
So we're going to talk about the Chosin Battle now?
That's when the Chosin Battle began. Actually, in mid to late November, there had been increasing signs of Chinese intervention. We had seen Chinese troops in the area and encountered them in battles and defeated them pretty well. By November 24th, The 1st Marine Division had reached the Chosin Reservoir with one regiment, the 1st Marine Regiment, staying at a place called Kotori, which was about 12 miles south of Chosin. The division headquarters moved to Hagaru-ri, which was right at the foot of the Chosin Reservoir, along with supporting elements, artillery, engineers, tanks, and so forth. The 5th Marine Regiment, an infantry regiment, and the 7th Marine Regiment also had moved out to the northwest of there, about 14 miles, to a place called Udamni. And on the night, and of course we had engaged the Chinese on the way there, but not too heavily. But on the night of the 25th of November, I think it was, we were in defensive positions, and Chinese forces had attacked all of our locations. The ones at Kotori, the ones at Hagaru, and the ones at Udamni in heavy strength, and overran some of our positions, killing a lot of Marines. At the same time, there were some Army units over on the east side of the reservoir, and the area commander, who was an Army general who had overall command, had not anticipated a large force on that side. So he had only sent a couple of Army battalions there who were attacked by 2 Chinese divisions. And 2 Chinese divisions against 2 Army regiments, 2 Army battalions, was just overwhelming. And they were overrun and almost entirely wiped out. Some of the survivors of that engagement escaped across the ice and came into our lines at Hagaru. In the meantime, at Udamni, they'd overrun some of our positions, but we quickly regrouped and began a severe battle for survival at Udamni. We were tremendously overwhelmed by their massive numbers. I think it was said that overall in the North Korean area where we were, the U.S. forces were outnumbered about 10 or 12 to 1 in strength and numbers. We were fortunate to have air cover, which came in handy when we had sunny conditions, but it was winter and we had heavy snows, and it was a tough battle fighting there in the cold, in temperatures that probably went down to 35 or 40 degrees below zero. And we weren't prepared for a heavy-duty winter campaign, and a lot of people got frostbite and ultimately lost limbs from the cold, arms, hands and feet. But we were able to consolidate our positions and fight back and defend ourselves. And General MacArthur, who saw the situation as for what it was, that we were tremendously outnumbered, made the decision to withdraw from that area. So we were ordered to pull back. So along about the last day of November, or somewhere in there, 5th Marines and 7th Marines pulled back to Hagaru-ri, and the Army survivors came into there, and our commanding general, General Smith, directed us to continue to withdraw to the south over the next period of a week or so. So I think it was the 6th of December, we started out from Hagaru south to continue our way south to Hamhung and Hungnam. We had great help from the British Royal Marines. They were tremendous fighters. They were good buddies, and we highly commend them for their support for us. They lost heavily too. So not only from the battle casualties, but for all the cold injuries that we suffered. But it was a hard-fought battle as we moved south, and in the meantime, Coterie was being besieged by heavy forces, and we consolidated there and then continued to march south, ultimately finding our way down to the sea at Ham Hung or Hung, I can't remember I think to go back, the initial landing coming into North Korea was at Wonsan, but we left at the port of, I think it was Hungnam eventually, probably around the 11th of December. Well, it started then with the complete withdrawal from North Korea until it was completed and all the U.S. forces were out of North Korea. But in the meantime, we had fought severe battles fighting the cold and the enemy on our way south. And it was a tough fight, and we lost a lot of men by being overrun by heavily outnumbered by in heavy numbers by the Chinese. And we lost men captured and dying of wounds. We were able to evacuate some from an airstrip that we'd created up at Hagaru by our engineers scraping the bared frozen dirt and making an airstrip there. So the fight was a tough one, but we came out and went aboard ship, sailed to South Korea.
What kind of conversations did you have with your fellow men during that time?
Our main thought was killing Chinese. That was our job. That's what we were there for. Whether we're going attacking to the north or attacking the south, it was a matter of fighting them. Some people call it a retreat, but when you're surrounded, you're not retreating, you're attacking the enemy, and that's an advance in one direction or another, wherever the enemy is. We were directed to move south, and we fought our way to the south. So we had no thoughts except to survive and fight our way out of that entrapment. I don't know of anybody who really thought of anything else. We just, we knew what we had to do. We did followed our orders. We directed our men who were subordinate to us, and we fought whatever direction we had to go. So that's basically our thoughts. It didn't make any difference what the conditions were at any time during time in Korea. We were fighting an enemy, and we fought that enemy, and survival was important too, because we were fighting the cold as well. And we had, by that time, we had received some cold weather clothing, including what we called shoe packs, which were kind of a boot-like thing, made of rubber, and there was no ventilation in it, and even in the temperature of 35 or 40 below, when you're fighting hard, you sweat, and water, sweat would collect in the shoe packs. There's no way to get rid of it, and when you stop moving, your feet froze, and then a lot of people got frostbite, frozen feet, ultimately losing limbs. But that was the condition, and we lived with what we had. We never thought of comfort. We thought of survival, basically, and killing the enemy. That was our job, and that was our paramount thought: killing the Chinese because they were the enemy.
What were some of when you recall, your most challenging, difficult time?
Well, trying to keep the weapons working in the cold weather. They'd freeze up, and had to constantly exercise the movement of the bolts so they wouldn't freeze. Trucks had to be kept running. idling so they wouldn't freeze up, because if they shut down, they wouldn't be able to start. Food was frozen, so we had trouble eating. Everything was frozen. The corpsmen had what they call syrettes for administering drugs to the wounded, and they were frozen. They kept them warm by holding them in their mouth, so they stay warm, so they could administer them when it came time. Everything was frozen. Food, clothing, ammunition, everything was had to be thawed out in order to use it. So that was a tough part of it. It made it a little tougher than we Marines are a hardy lot. We were always trained to do what was the mission. That was our primary concern. It was just a little bit more difficult because of the cold. Well, it was, I think, a lot difficult because of the cold. But everything was tough to fight because it was unusual conditions, and a little bit more than we were accustomed to.
Were you told beforehand that it would get to that low of degrees and?
Yeah, no, we never knew. We just knew it was cold. I was a squad leader then, acting platoon leader, actually, because we didn't have any officers with us. We were down to about, well, a rifle company consists of about 190 men, including 6 officers. When we consolidated at Hagaru at the foot of the reservoir, the company I was in was down to about 35 men and 1 officer. I was a sergeant. There were 2 sergeants. I was one of them. And we both were acting platoon leaders. It was a lieutenant's job, but we didn't have a platoon of about 35 men. We had platoons of about 12 or 13 men, which is basically a rifle squad. But that's what we had, and that's what we worked with. Somebody had once said to Colonel Fuller, who was the regimental commander of the 1st Marines, about retreating. He says, "We're not retreating, we're just fighting in another direction." And that's what we did. The cold was a hazard to us, but we didn't think about that. I mean, we thought about it, but we had no choice. Survival meant we had to fight, and fight and fight until we escaped. I remember on the 8th of December, we had reached Coterie. The main part of the column had fought our way south from Hagaru to Coterie, and the company I was in was ordered to go up on the hills to the southwest of Coterie and attack the enemy to protect the column, which was down in the valley. And it was a blinding snowstorm that day. It was terrible. It was a tough fight, and it was pretty slow going. I read once where the regimental commander, Colonel Litzenberg, who was the commander of the 7th Marine Regiment, telling the battalion commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 7th Marines that he probably should commit his reserve unit to the fight. And the commander's reply was, "They're all up there. George Company with about 25, and Howe Company with about the same number, and Item Company with maybe 30 people." That was the battalion I was in, which normally is about 1,000 men. And we're talking about something about less than 100 people. So that's how we were, but we didn't have any choice, and we didn't want any choice. I mean, we would have liked to have a choice, but we used what we got, and we fought them.
What were some of your more happier time memories? Do you have those that you can share?
Well, one happy time was when we reached Hung Nam, and we went aboard ship. to sail out of North Korea. We're pleased to be out of there. Although going aboard ship, there weren't very many ships, so we went aboard a troop transport that I don't know what its accommodations were, but we had about 4 or 5 times the number of troops aboard there. So it was a little bit crowded. We did what they call hot bunking. If there were we were three of us to a bunk, so we'd sleep in shifts. The chow lines ran 24 hours a day. You'd get into the chow line and go for a meal, and by the time you got there, it would be time to change, and if you were gone there for breakfast, they'd be soon changing to lunch, and then later on changing to supper. But that's the way it went for several days as we sailed south. So it was kind of crowded, but it was nice to be aboard ship and get a warm shower. And we hadn't had showers for a month or so, and it was good to be able to get the dirty clothes off and get some clean ones on, and get cleaned up. So we were a pretty ragged looking bunch, but we're still ready to fight.
And how long were you on the ship?
I think it took a couple of days to sail from Hungnam to Busan. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it seemed like a couple of days.
And that was also when the civilians were on board, right?
Yes. As we came out of Chosin, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees following us out of there. It was estimated, I think, 100,000 refugees, or 98,000 refugees. And they wanted to escape from North Korea because they'd lived in North Korea under the communists for 5 years, and they didn't want any more of it. It was a terrible government. Some 98,000 people tried to escape from North Korea, following us down to the port. Mm-hmm. One ship called the Meredith Victory was a transport ship. It was a cargo ship, and the commander of that ship took all the cargo out, and built platforms in the holds about 3 or 4 stories high of these platforms, so that he could accommodate about 14,000 refugees. And they were standing up. There was no sitting down during this period of time. There were several babies born during that period of time. Fortunately, nobody died in the day or two that it took to sail down to Busan. But that was a tough time for the North Korean people too.
Did you interact with the people on board?
Well, they were not on our ship. It was all Marines on our ship. There was about 5,000 Marines on the ship, a ship that was designed for about a third of them. So there was no interaction with the North Koreans. We had some interaction coming down from Hagaru. They were trying to follow with us, and we had to keep them back because the Chinese soldiers were infiltrating into their body of people, using them for cover to try to attack us. So that was our only interaction, and I was in the forward edge of the group, the column that was moving south. So I didn't have any interaction at all. I had very little interaction at all during the whole time I was in Korea. I had some down south as we tried to enter Seoul, fight our way into Seoul. But the main thing was to have them out of the way so we could attack the North Koreans, defending the north part of Seoul as we tried to come in there.
Mm-hmm. As you were on board and going down, what were some of your thoughts? What was going on in your mind?
Getting warm, getting something to eat, getting some sleep. It was nice not to be shot at, nice to be out of the cold, and that basically survival is what we thought about, nothing more. Yeah, it was just what was going on at the moment. We didn't have any reason to think about anything else other than our current situation. We knew we were to go down to South Korea, but we didn't think much about what was going to happen when we got there.
During your time during the war, did you write letters home?
Occasionally, when we had a chance. In fact, I had gotten a speeding ticket in my hometown before I returned to Camp Pendleton and went to Korea. And I hadn't paid it, so I thought maybe they'd be kind of after me to pay that ticket, but I wasn't around to be caught by the police for speeding. But after we had gone through Seoul, I had captured some North Koreans, and they had some won on their person, and I liberated that and carried it with me as kind of souvenirs. And I sent some of that in a letter to the chief of police of Spokane, Washington, where my home had been, and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't pay sooner, and here's all the money I've got," because we didn't have the U.S. money. And I ultimately got a letter back from him. "Well, all is forgiven, and feel free to come home." So that was a good deal. I don't know how much I sent him. I didn't even know how much won I had or how much it was value, what the value was in U.S. money. So I just sent him some bills and hoped for the best, and it turned out to be best.
Do you have any letters that you send home that are still around, that were saved?
No, I don't know. I never did. Some people had, but I didn't.
Do you know what you wrote in it? Do you remember?
Well, no, I don't. Probably said, "Well, we're attacking today, or we're doing this, or whatever that." Not a lot of detail. Wasn't much detail, and I didn't want to be getting people excited about or concerned about my safety, because I felt that was okay. Although I had gotten wounded on the 2nd of October and evacuated Japan for a while, but I wasn't too concerned about that.
And did you receive letters from home?
Occasionally, yeah.
Do you remember what those said?
No.
No.
No, I really, I was more occupied at the moment of what was going on around me more than anything else. Though home was something far in the distance and far from my thoughts.
Yeah. What was your family's reaction when you told them that you're going to go to Korea?
Well, I guess they were worried. There wasn't much choice. That was my job. I was a Marine, and I was supposed to go where the Marines go. And, they understood that, so I don't really remember consulting them on how they felt about it. I'm sure my parents were worried about it, as the parents want to be. They worry about their sons, but I don't think we had a lot of discussion about it. My father had been in the Army in World War I, so he understood what was going on. He'd been an ambulance driver in France, so he'd seen some action of significance. So he was concerned about it, naturally, but no long discussions of what was going on.
Any other battles that you want to share with the audience? Battle memories or?
Well, I remember when I was at Chosin on the 8th of December. That hill that I talked, that place where we were fighting, and I told you we're down to about 30 people. I was acting as a platoon leader with a platoon of about 13 people, 12 or 13 people, and we attacked up on the hill, came up to the top of the hill, and I remember very distinctly as we reached the summit, there was a Chinaman in what we call a spider hole. It was kind of a hole in the ground with kind of a cover over it, so it was concealed. And this Chinaman popped up out of there with what was known as a burp gun. We called it a burp gun because it sounded like brrr. It was a 9mm submachine gun, Russian design. And he fired off a few rounds. And fortunately, I was standing close to him, but also standing close to me was my runner, a PFC by the name of Walter. God, I can't even think of his name. I talked to him a couple of days ago. But, names, I'm getting old and kind of absent-minded. But anyhow, Walter Taubert, yeah, he was standing right next to me, and he received the burst of ammunition from the Chinese, and he went down. Well, of course, I had a heavy weapon, 30 caliber automatic rifle called a BAR, or Browning automatic rifle, and I took care of the Chinaman. And then after that was the last thing we did to secure that hill, and we turned to help see what was going on with Walter. And he was laying on the ground and seemed to be unconscious. We thought he was a goner. But he'd had heavy clothing on. He had the heavy parkas that we wore, and it had a cartridge belt. And apparently the short round, 2 or 3 rounds of submachine gun fire from a burp gun, which is not a very strong bullet, had probably hit him right in the midsection where he was best protected. And we stripped off his clothes to see what his wounds were, and he wasn't wounded. His heavy clothing and his cartridge belt had stopped the rounds, and I think he had probably just fainted from surprise and fear from being shot at. And as we took his clothes down to see what was wrong with him, the snow fell on him, and he woke him up. And we were glad to see him. And we talk about that to this day. I was talking to him a couple of days ago, thinking about that time. We remember each other very well from that time. And we remember another friend, Sergeant Kelly, who was a close friend of mine, who just died 2 or 3 days ago. I'm going to go to his funeral here next week in Texas.
What was your most rewarding moment, if you can name one?
Well, it didn't come during the time of the war. I have been rewarded over the years since then by my return to Korea and seeing what the Korean people have done for their country. I see Seoul, which at that time was basically primarily wooden structures that were mostly torn down, or knocked down by gunfire. The only thing was left was primarily a palace and the train station. And I remember those very well as we had gone through Seoul. And to come back there and see the city now with 13 million people and great high-rise structures, tall skyscraper building, and modern vehicles, and the whole thing just amazed me. And the rewarding part about it was that the Korean people had done so much with the freedom that we helped them achieve, and that was a great reward.
But you didn't feel that, like during the war, or you didn't have a lot of like rewarding moments during the war or right after?
Well, seeing Walter Taubert alive was a great reward. But immediately after the war, the best thing was being out of there.
And during the war, you didn't have any like negative feelings towards this war happening and you being involved?
No, because I became a Marine 5 years before that with the intent of defending my country, and I was not able to do it in World War II because the war ended while I was in boot camp. But our country called in 1950 and said, we want you to go to Korea and help defend the South Korean people. And that was my main thought. You know, as a Marine, we never thought about anything else. We kept doing the job that we were trained to do.
How do you think you could best describe this legacy of the Korean War veterans that's left now?
Well, there's two legacies. One is the remembrance of our time in Korea, and we organized a unit called an organization called the Chosin Feud, named for the battle that we survived. And so we've got a lot of members there, that not a lot now, but the survivors of the Battle of Chosin come together every other year as a reunion to recall our time there and our memories of serving together and defending each other. Another legacy is the freedom of the people of South Korea. We helped achieve that, and that is a legacy that can't be surpassed. I really like the Korean people. I feel sorry for the North Koreans. And I know the South Korean people would like to reunite with their people in the North, because there's talk that there's going to be a reunion set up with the people of the South and some of the relatives who are still in the North. And it may come about or it may not, depending on how the North Koreans react. They're not dependable people.
Do all the veterans share that sentiment, or do you think it's stronger within you?
I don't know. Some of them, I talk about them saying, you got an opportunity to go back and see the place, and some of them, like other wars, they don't want to go back. They don't want to see anything about it. Not even when I tell them what great place it is now. And others have been back too, and they probably share my feelings about it. But I feel sorry for the guys who have an opportunity to go back to Korea and see the place, because they're missing out on a lot. And they probably get better feelings about their service there if they did, like I have.
How about the time after the war, when you came back home? How were things like?
Came back and went to work as a Marine in the United States. It was not anything different. I mean, we're all veterans. I mean, more and more people were going to Korea after we left it, until finally they had a truce in, I think, 1953. So the war went on a couple of years after I left. So we were all concerned about our friends who were going to fight there too. So that was the main concern, and we kept training. As a Marine, we keep training for war and hope we don't have to get in it. But that was all we did.
When did you exactly come back to the U.S.?
Well, when I talked about the last part of the battle on the 8th of December in the snowstorm, that night it was the coldest night in Korea. It probably went down. It was said to have gone down to about 40 below. It's well known to Marines, the bean patch. And we went into bivouac there to recuperate and refit to go back into battle. Well, by that time I was hobbling around so bad that I couldn't perform my duties, and they told me to turn into sick bay, which I did. And they saw my feet and said, "You're not fit for duty," and so they evacuated me through the chain. I went to Yokosuka Naval Hospital again, and ultimately I got evacuated back to the United States. Went to the Naval Hospital in Bremerton, where I stayed for, I'm not sure, I can't remember how long, a month or two, while my feet thawed out and I was able to walk normally or considerably better than before, and return to duty. And I did. I returned to duty and went back to duty at the Naval Air Station in Seattle, where I was on the Guard detachment. I was the commander of the Guard there, and we had a lot of Korean vets there. It's because all these stations had been cut back to small numbers, because as the Marine Corps had to build up for Korea, they had been reduced so that it couldn't perform their normal mission of security for the air station there. And this was just typical of everywhere in the United States and other places where Marines were stationed, that they weren't, who were not in the divisions. So the Korean vets came back, and those who were back to duty went to the posts and stations where they had to fill in for and make sure that they were able to perform our duties in these other places where Marines were assigned. So I went to Seattle and at this Naval Air Station there, and went to duty there.
Before, when you mentioned the star that you saw, I saw that you were starting to tear up. It's been so many years since the war. We still get emotional. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's because I had so many friends I fought with, and some of them died, and some of them were alive, and over the years we've come together again in the organization called the Chosin Few, and we can recall the times together. You know, there's a close camaraderie of us because we fought together, and some died and some stayed alive. And now particularly, my close friend Bill Kelly died a couple of days ago, and that's tough for me. I'm leaving next week to go to his funeral, and the Chosin Few is becoming fewer and fewer, and our friends are dying. You know, the youngest is probably about 81 or 82 of the group that we were in, and it's hard to lose our friends, particularly when we fought together and suffered together, and some died and some lived, and we recall what we've done in our lifetime. But you know, seeing that star was an important event to us. We didn't think of it at the time, except the fact that it was going to be a good day the next day for fighting.
Right. Would you like to, on behalf of your brothers who fell and who are not here with us anymore, would you want to say anything on their behalf, maybe about them, so we can also remember them?
Well, the Marine Corps has a motto called Semper Fidelis, means always faithful. And everybody who's a Marine, who sees another Marine, whether he knows him or not, we always shorten it. We say Semper Fi. We greet each other with that. And I just want to say Semper Fi to all my Marine friends, particularly the ones who fought with me at Chosin, and any other Marine who I was with in Vietnam and other wars where the Marines have been engaged. The Marines who were fighting in Afghanistan, who fought in Iraq. Just want to say Semper Fi to all of you.
Would you like to name any of them and the duties that they served, so we also remember what kind of service they did?
Well, I want to think about Staff Sergeant Pappenheimer, who was my platoon sergeant. He was kind of a father figure to me, because I was a squad leader, a subordinate to him. And Bill Kelly, who just died, he was another squad leader in the same platoon. And I want to remember them, and I always will remember them. But Pappy, he, like I say, he was a close friend and mentor, basically. we kind of laugh about it because Bill Kelly and Staff Sergeant Pappenheimer, we were all about the same age. And Pappy was severely wounded and frozen, and he had to be discharged from the Marine Corps because he lost his feet. He was severely wounded, but he recovered and went on to become an advocate for the chosen few with the Veterans Administration.
When you look back at your life, so what do you think Korean War means to you?
Well, it was probably the most important thing in my life at the time. And it's something I look back to and remember in many ways fondly. In other ways, it was tough. But I got trained in boot camp that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And that's been my, I guess you'd call it a motto. It's been with me the rest of my life. I think of hardships that I've faced in other times and places, but I'm a Marine, and I'll always be a Marine. And if things get tough, I figure a way to overcome the situation. I'm proud of being a Marine. I'm proud of my career in the Marine Corps, and it's made me a better person for it. And Chosin was a real force that has guided me since then, 60-some years ago.
This interview could be shown like as a documentary to youth, young people. What else would you like to say for?
Well, there's several things. One is that in Seoul there's a business called Hans Engraving. Hans Engraving makes some coins that recognize the chosen few. And I've had some, and I ordered some more. A couple of years I ordered some from him. I ordered 300 coins. And I thought, well, when am I going to get these coins? So I sent him an email, and finally they came. And I never did get a bill for them. And I've tried to contact him by email, by writing to him, by writing to the person who sent them on his behalf. And I've never gotten any answers. And I feel badly that I've never been able to pay him back for those coins. I really do. And maybe he'll see this, and maybe he'll say, okay, here's the bill. Because it's time for me to pay up, and I can't do it, because he hasn't told me, and I want to pay him. And I know, and I'll tell you, the Korean government has been so great. They've recognized veterans of the war in many ways, in trips back to Korea, and I tell you, I love to go back to Korea. I love to be there and see the Korean people, and I love the Korean people. I go to church. My pastor is a Korean minister, and I see you, and I know what you're doing, and I'm proud of you for doing what you're doing to recognize the war. Not only that, but everything else you do is publicity for the Korean people in the United States, and I think you're great for doing that, and appreciate you doing this video series to recognize Marine veterans.
Thank you. Anything else you want to say?
Just to all my Marine friends and unknowns, Semper Fi.